To start with, a lot of organizations now have been compelled to go remote. And I'm sure a lot of them are struggling with setting up the right processes, getting the right tools. So how would you advise organizations who are looking to start with their remote work journey now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I to try and put it simple in a few buckets, I think one of the most important is figuring out rituals. So
Right,
understanding how you still create rituals within your organization and team. So
right,
for some examples, we've had some happy hours. Our lunch hours by offices are still being held. People are still joining these rituals that kind of bring the team together. For our business, we have to focus a lot on over communicating. So as an organization moves remote, I think the communication ends up being a key piece of this, and rituals are a way to keep communication going. So what's that kind of look like? I think for a lot of companies, it's setting daily stand-ups. Maybe the team's all joining a call at 9:15 every morning, or everyone's getting together at lunch hour to review priorities. I think for organizations that haven't been distributed in remote, communication will end up being their biggest issue. I think there'll probably be a few weeks where you need to evaluate what tools you use. Is it Google Hangouts and Zoom? If they're not using project management tools, which tool do you use? Once you kind of fix what tool set your team works on, I think it comes back to rituals and making sure that there's a lot of communication. A lot of the issue with remote work is not being on the same page, especially as it relates to having many time zones and many different roles and functions. So I would suggest you may need to be creating reoccurring meetings that didn't exist when you were in person. And a little bit of that is trying to capture the water cool effect of like when you both go grab a coffee or when you're hanging out in
right,
the office. So how do you recreate some of that? My feedback is like cultural or like social rituals. So turn your lunch meetings if you guys ate lunch usually together, schedule a new meeting now where people can join for lunch. So we're doing that on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Additionally, we do these daily morning stand-ups. So people are getting together every morning and talking across time zones and across teams and functions. Um,
right.
I think rituals around communication is a big piece of how to get through remote work for an organization that's not used to it. And we've been doing this 4 years. I've been doing this 10 years. It's like still remote work has its challenges, but communication constantly becomes the thing that you want to try and make sure as leaders or employees you're over communicating and you're keeping everybody on the same page. And yeah, my suggestion is to kind of look at what rituals. I think for tools and technology of like how you support actual remote work, there's a ton of that stuff out there, and I think any one of them may work best. A lot would that have to do with like what do you use for documents and organization, and some of the other technology choices your company has should affect that. But I think regardless of tools and technologies, it's about communication and setting rituals to help your team communicate and stay on the same page.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned rituals and team meetings, because I think a large part of working on premises in an organization is being in constant contact with your colleagues, your managers, and meetings are a big part of your day.
Yep.
And I'm sure a lot of people would have realized once they started working remotely that a lot of meetings could actually uh, be emails and
Yeah. Yeah, I
and
think it's a unique challenge of figuring out like at first what needs to be a meeting, what's an hour-long meeting, what can just be 15 minutes, what can just be 30 minutes. Yeah, what's an email, what needs to be a Slack message. And I
right,
think I would err on the caution of over communicating and maybe too many meetings at first, and then
right,
scaling back as a team or organization or leadership on what's not necessary, right? So an anecdote there, like feedback and advice I generally rule is if you can send it in an email, it shouldn't be a meeting. And a lot of that ends up being status updates and information updates.
right,
So it's about sharing numbers or progress. That's very easy to send in an email or a Slack message, for example. What's not easy is coming with consensus. So generally, meetings should be saved for consensus building, decision making, and then aligning on things. They shouldn't be for updating people, right? And I think updates generally should be an email or a Slack message. And if you're a new organization at this, and we're constantly improving this, we've created a new ritual. Every year we try and nuke all of our reoccurring meetings. So we're constantly trying to understand what meetings are valuable for our team. And I think an organization who's moving remote work and work from home, they should probably over communicate at first. And people may be inundated with, wow, I have too many meetings. And then take a real step back at which meetings could be emails, which meetings could be dashboards.
Right.
But I think, and that's probably what would happen, is you're going to have too many meetings. And then as a team, you need to realize which ones could be shorter, which ones do we not really need. But it's definitely something to be mindful. And the rule of thumb is like, yeah, how could this be an email? And for me, if it's consensus building, decision making, aligning on priorities, these kind of things that need a conversation should be meetings, and everything else you need to start to create rituals around sharing an email. So we do weekly updates for our brands. We do weekly updates from our channels. We have like daily and weekly messages in Slack channels, same thing. So like number updates, progress updates, these things are reserved for text written communication, and we save video meetings for decision making, consensus making, and even brainstorming, right? Something that you need a little bit more of a high bandwidth discussion.
Right. So these communication conventions, so to say, would so I think organizations would need to figure these out on their own based on the kind of teams they're working with, kind of the workforce they have, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. And a big part of remote work, a big part of the conversation is also productivity. So while studies show that remote teams are more productive than on-premises teams, organizations, HR leaders still have their concerns when it comes to remote work. So essentially, how do you monitor, measure, and improve productivity? So
so our organization, and I would challenge other people to do this too, is like you need to be impact focused, and impact is measurable. So first of all, like productivity isn't hours working or butts in seats and time spent. It's the impact you generate, right? So if you focus on how do you measure the impact people generate, you can be less focused on the time they're spending, right? And you need to find the right balance of measuring the impact someone generates in the right amount of time. But I think this is where a lot of people will have trouble with work from home. Is it's not as much about 9 to 5. I'm focused the whole time. I would say that any concerns and productivity lost from working at home is gained when people don't have to commute. So that alone seems like a break even. But in reality, I think figuring out the ways in which you can measure people's effectiveness and productivity, right? So if that's if I would challenge that most roles have something measurable, right? It's Asana tickets completed, it's projects completed, it's the metrics you improved, it's response rate, it's the number of applicants, it's something that puts a measure on what the employee is doing, and making sure that you're measuring these things. And that would should take away a little bit of alleviation and concern in terms of productivity, because you really shouldn't be concerned with how much time they spend. You should be concerned with how much work they output. And in an ideal world, these people are a little bit more flexible now that they're work from home. Maybe, between 9 to 5, because the kids are home, they have some interruptions in the day and they do some work in the evening, in the morning, and it's more about what they output. So if there's concerns about productivity, I would figure out ways in which you can measure the effectiveness of your team and create benchmarks and create targets. And that shouldn't be based on hours or time. It should be based on activities and outputs and things created or things done. And that way, the HR team and the managers should feel confident that people are staying productive and busy by the output of the work they're doing. So I think it's finding the right measures to understand your team's productivity. And, for a software engineer, it's bug fixes or GitHub commits. And for a marketer, it's maybe number of ads tested or improvement in marketing costs. Or for an HR person, it's number of performance reviews reviewed. Or I can imagine that most departments have something measurable. And that's how we viewed this to understand productivity, right? To understand a good employee who's productive versus one who's not. It should be focused on the work output, the quantity and the quality of the work they do, not the time they spend. So that's one. And then the additional is, any concerns with productivity lost by being at home, I think are quickly gained when you figure out how much time is not spent commuting, how much time is not spent in between going from things, leaving the office for a coffee, doing these things. I've found that when people are forced to sit in the office 9 to 5, they actually waste way more time than when they're working from home. Because when they're working from home, they just want to get done with all the work. When you're working at an office, they're taking coffee breaks, you're taking long lunch breaks, you're chatting with people. Like, you're actually much less productive in the office. I think it's a manager's insecurity that, if I don't see them, I don't know that they're busy. And this just goes back to my first point of figure out how you measure and understand their productivity. You really quickly understand if your team's performing. And then you kind of give them the flexibility to understand how they work, right? And it's what their output is. But if they work better in 2-hour spurts, then let them work in 2-hour spurts. And I think our previous question about meetings, really quickly, people will be slammed with meetings, right? And then the actual productivity is not going to be there because they won't have time to do the real work. So I think it's finding that balance of meetings and communication so you're on top of each other, but additionally having measures for the work they're doing so that you can feel confident they're staying productive based on the output or the thing they're doing.
Great. Yeah. So a big part of the traditional organization setup is uh, being able to speak to your manager face to face, get feedback. One of the things that you mentioned was performance management. So something like feedback, manager feedback, or just regular updates on ongoing projects. Does remote work change any of that? Do the KPIs, do the performance management KPIs change, or does the approach need to change? Um,
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the metrics for performance reviews are probably mostly the same still. I think how you deliver those updates, how you deliver feedback ends up being slightly different. And I think the example I have for, let's say, daily updates or weekly updates, I think it's based on your manager or the organization's desire. So for us, I think when I think through me as a manager and my other managers about how they manage their one-to-ones,
yeah.
a common tactic is having a Google Doc for each single person. At each weekly meeting, we're bringing it back up. We're writing through what we worked on, all the things we talked about, so that the next week when we get together, we can reflect upon about what was done. And this is like the most basic way. Let's just share a Google document, and we can use this for our meeting notes. We can use this for how I manage feedback and tasks with you. And then every time we meet, we're bringing that document back up. So that's a really easy way. I think when you take one step back, there's a lot of tools and services that kind of help you with this. We personally use Lattice. I really like Lattice. They have performance reviews. There's the daily stand-up kind of updates, weekly updates. They make it easier to kind of automate a lot of this. So collecting what the person's working on, submitting feedback. And Lattice is kind of the market leader in people management. But if you look at something like, there's another solution, 15.5, it's pretty cool. It's a very lightweight way to stay up to date with performance management. So I think between 15.5 and Lattice, or even just using a lightweight free thing like Google Docs, you create a cadence for how you're providing feedback and how you're managing the employees. And I think the more remote and distributed you are, the more you need to create these online, again, rituals of how you communicate this stuff.
Right.
You have to replace that face-to-face feedback, and you need to do that in a few different ways, giving them feedback on Lattice, telling them on your one-to-ones, doing 360 reviews. So Lattice makes that easy to collect feedback from your team members as well. That's kind of how we've looked at it, is how do we choose technology that makes it easier for the employee and the manager to give and receive feedback, both on their day-to-day updates and at a larger level with their career progression. And we've been lucky enough to build out our people team recently and really focus on this area. But for a new company moving into a remote workforce, they may need to adapt a new technology that helps with this reoccurring update, indexing these updates. And yeah, I'd suggest something like Lattice or 15.5 or a lightweight way to just have managers use ongoing documents with their team members.
Right. So another thing that's, I think, one of the top of the mind priorities for HR leaders globally, and I expect some of them to struggle with this with the current situation, and that is employee engagement, boosting employee morale. So when you're in an office space, it is easy for HR teams to set up activities or set up, again, virtual meetings to actively monitor how employees are engaging with their work. how they're engaging with their colleagues. Um, how do you do it at resident with your
Yeah, it's a
remote
great
team?
question. Yeah, I mean, so we're still, it's a growing challenge. I feel like we figure it out and then we hire more people, or the organization changes structures, or so it's something I think we're always trying to perfect at. But over the last few years, we've learned a few things that kind of help. I think we've created channels. We use Slack a lot as this, right? It's our constant communication tool. We have channels like Resident Unite, and it's in the mornings. People are saying good morning to each other. It's like we have more than one or two areas in which we create a very open and communication forward, I guess, culture. And a lot of this is led by our CS team. They're really exceptional at this, mostly because there's more of our CS team than any other group. So they have to kind of rally each other. But yeah, we've got Residents Unite. It's pretty cool. Every morning, it's a bunch of people saying good morning and what's kind of new. They say good night. We have a random channel that kind of keeps things funny. We have channels where there are games like Jeopardy and other games that kind of keep people doing these lightweight activities between each other. And we do this stuff once a week or once every few days. So it's, again, trying to find that balance of keeping people engaged and not being distracted. So that's one thing, is trying to create and there's a lot of Slack tools to do this. Donut is a cool one where it pairs people to engage one-to-one. So we've tried with that kind of thing. How do you just connect employees who may not be talking so that they can have quick 30-minute chat and get to know other employees? So I think it depends on the size of your company. The smaller you are, the easier this is to handle by having fun Slack channels and making sure you create ways to stay engaged. As your organization gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and if you're in the thousands of employees, I think it's figuring out ways like Donut or technologies that help connect your employees it's not organic anymore because it's being forced, but you're kind of creating these bridges of communication. So that helps. The additional is we hold weekly all hands. We have monthly all hands now. We were originally weekly when the team was smaller. Now we're monthly all hands. We do weekly department things. So making sure that each group is getting together in some way. And a lot of that is us celebrating wins. So every month on our monthlies, we have residents of the month, and every group can kind of nominate employees, and those employees win a prize and an award. So we kind of keep our all hands and our general larger group communications about ways we keep people engaged and happy and celebrate our wins, right? So I think that's a big one, making sure that people are excited to attend these meetings. Trying to think of we just do a lot of random little things to make sure the morale on the team is kind of rallying together. And a lot of it has to do with subgroups in Slack, and then how when we get together for all hands and video calls, we're treating those meetings, right? We've had a hard time. How do you scale past 10 or 15 people in a meeting to be engaging? And that's really difficult. And that's where we've kind of moved all hands to be monthly, where it's a little bit more broadcasting. It's 120 people listening to 5 or 10 people talk. And then that's one end of the spectrum. And the other is these one-to-one chats, right? How do you connect people who may not be chatting with each other? And then in between, these smaller group get-togethers, right? And it's easier for our organization than others because we've broken out in these small cross-functional teams. We call them pods. So our pods get together all the time. They're kind of like little startups. It's a lot easier to keep 15 people engaged with each other than it is 150 people. So we work on how do you keep these 15-person pods really engaged? And then on a monthly or weekly basis, you're kind of cross-pollinating engagement at a bigger level. But this way, your immediate surrounding, you're really engaged with your team, the direct people around you. What we want to avoid is 1 or 2 people report to their manager and they only talk to their manager, right? We want you talking to other people in the organization. And we had to kind of construct their team to support that. And for a lot of companies, they may not be able to create these small cross-functional teams. Right. And that's where something like Donut or creating these rituals where you're bringing people together who usually wouldn't talk. And from what I've found, that improves employee engagement because people feel connected. They can kind of understand what other people are doing within their company. But again, you got to create rituals to let that happen and help create space.
Okay.
It's a hard one, though. We still always play with this, right? So trying to do contests, and we do a friends and family referral contest, and contests and engagements, and trying to do things cross-company end up being a fun way to keep everybody engaged. These awards we do, and a lot of companies do this stuff offline. I think it's just figuring out how you move it online now that you're all remote and distributed. Celebrating someone's birthday. Just last week, we signed a bunch of, we signed e-cards for people whose birthday it was over the weekend, and they got an e-card and a gift card, and the e-card had everybody's messages, and that's maybe something you do in person on a Tuesday when it's Sally or Brad's birthday, you go up to their desk and you give balloons. How do you recreate that online, right? Give them a small gift card. Send them. There's a lot of tools to send gift, greeting cards and greeting messages. Think of turning some of your offline activities online, and I think it's a great way to keep your employees engaged.
That's really interesting. So essentially, having an on-premise team or having all the employees working in the same place isn't critical to building a strong culture, a strong work culture, right? So I
don't think you need to be. I think one thing I haven't mentioned is it is important to get together in person as much as possible, right? So the more distributed you are, the less likely you're going to get together. And I think like Buffer is a really exceptional smaller company that does remote work really well, like Buffer app. And they do yearly summits. I think for companies that can afford it, figuring out how you do yearly or bi-yearly summits. So maybe not everybody can get together, but how could you do some people every 6 months? And that's something we've been really mindful of. And frankly, it's the money we save on not having huge offices. A big chunk of that ends up going to travel. So making sure people do get together. But I think we and many others right now over the last few years are proof that you do not need a headquarters. You do not need everybody in the same room, and you can still be very effective. And I think we're more effective than a lot of our competitors who are all in one office. And the big thing there is because we didn't talk about this either, but we can find the best people all over the world. And then if you allow people to work from home, and we talked about optimizing for the right things and impact, they can manage their life around work and not their work around life, right? And what that looks like is people can pick up their kids from school, or in this case, watch them in the day, and they can be more flexible. And I think that ends up creating better work in general, right? So the trade-offs of being in person, I think you can end up finding the benefits in a remote culture. It is, some things are harder and some things are easier, and I think that's the important thing. Is it's a little bit of a trade-off, and finding the right balance is really important for your organization. And particularly as we scaled, we just naturally had people in the same cities, and that's why we started to create these hubs. And that's created its own thing where we have online cultures and offline cultures. But I see this as the future of work, and the more an organization can do to focus on measuring impact, building rituals around communication, I think you'll have happier employees who do better work.
Right, and I think we haven't discussed this yet, but I think did you have you seen your remote work culture being a major driver of being a major perk for prospective employees, like for candidates who are interviewing with you? Does that stand out like a clear benefit for them? Has it helped you get better talent?
Yes, for sure. I'd say. I think for a lot of people, it's one of the pluses. I'd say, and just transparently, not everybody is good at this. And I don't know if, and this may be a function of people don't have the practice, or they really need it in person. But so not everyone is suited for this, but I think every organization can figure out a way to make it work.
So do you have a unique onboarding ritual or onboarding process?
Yeah, we've learned from this as well, right? So it's sometimes I'd say we're still a startup and we're still trying to improve on this. And the hard part is I feel like we just start to figure this stuff out right when things have to change again and we have to figure it out again, right? So I think we've adapted our onboarding flows. A lot of that looks like for the first couple weeks, we joke it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's a lot of information. We throw you into a lot of meetings. We have you talk one-to-one with a lot of people. Which usually you may not do when you're in an office, right? When I have new people join, we schedule, here's the 12 people you need to talk to. Get at it, right? And we'll help schedule that stuff up. But right away, we drop you into the deep end of start to learn information. And the onboarding from a traditional perspective, I think, like our CS and sales teams, they have their own well-scheduled and thought out multi-week training and onboarding because they're most of those employees. So I think depending on the department, we've had to build onboarding structures and processes. And for others, we just haven't had the time or the ability to build out real onboarding. But a lot of it looks like having you sync with a lot of your coworkers. And we have a few presentations. I personally, every 2 weeks, I do a training call for a lot of new employees. They join. I talk through what makes our company special, what we're doing today, where we're taking the company, a little bit more of insight into how we operate. So we usually spend the first week or two bringing someone up to speed from an education perspective. So I think if you compared remote work to non-remote, it probably takes a remote employee a little bit longer to ramp up, right?
Mhm.
And so you knowing that, you kind of have to overcompensate in getting them involved in way more things than you may do if they were in your office, right? Putting them in meetings that may not be directly relevant right away, connecting them to people who they may not work with. And a lot of this has to do with just giving your new employees who are remote more connection to the rest of the organization, right? And it's easy if you hire someone to do one thing, and if you're not onboarding them to understand the rest of the company, I think, yeah, it's probably my biggest piece of feedback. You want to create bridges that they may not create later, right? So having a
Right.
designer talk to someone from the finance team or someone from the marketing team, they may not actually talk to them as they get really into their job, but those conversations have yielded really helpful because the employees feel connected to more people and locations around. And this especially is important when you have hubs. I think this is one key piece we haven't talked about, but a lot of these companies who would work remote or distributed, you have a hard time balancing the people who are in person together and those who aren't. And I think if you were hiring distributed and you had in-office culture, in-office communications, you need to figure out how you don't leave the people out of those conversations who aren't there. And a lot of that is moving things online that, again, usually just happen in person. But that goes back to the onboarding and being mindful of how do we bring people into the right conversations and give them the right information faster than if we were in person. So yeah, we always joke, we throw you into a ton of meetings. We give you a few presentations to overview like homework. And again, this kind of changes based on your department, but a lot of it is like over communicate, give them a lot of information to understand and come back to us with like some learnings.
Right. So the last question I wanted to close this interview by asking you, what are your tips for employees, managers, leaders looking to get up to speed with remote work? How do they get productive? What are the
Yeah, that's great. I think so for employees, if you're working at home, and managers, really anybody who's working with a company, I'd say this to everyone, you need to create like a space that's for your work. And what that means is a corner of your room or a desk or a place that you associate with doing work. What's not good is sitting in bed all the time or sitting at your dinner table is a bad example, right? You eat there, you do things there. You want to be able to leave your work as it is, right? And that's not, yeah. So I think that's my first tip. You need to create a space that is for your work from home, right? And that could just be a corner of a table or like, frankly, my suggestion is a desk with a monitor and a keyboard and really make it feel like an office setup in the corner. And so that's first tip. You need to make space for your work from home. You can't just be sitting at the dinner table or the couch. That's not going to work in the long run. It'll burn you down a little bit. It also helps you stop from blurring work and life. You want to kind of create that separation at home. So if you can, have a second office. For us New Yorkers who have no room, it's a corner of my house is my office corner, right? So I think it's creating that space. The next is around time too, like create the same kind of rituals you would have going to an office. So immediately everyone's like, I'm working in my pajamas, I don't have to get ready. That is not what I'd suggest. I'd also suggest like get showered in the morning, get ready, make your coffee, do your breakfast, get ready as if you're about to leave the house, and then go sit down at your desk, right? And I think people will realize if you're not doing this over time pretty quickly, it's hard to feel. I think it's bad for your productivity. It's bad for your mental health. Like you really need to prepare yourself for the day of work. So it's space, making sure you have space for where to work. I think you need to take it seriously on how you get ready in the morning. Like what's your ritual to get ready for work? Making sure you leave yourself some space there, but before you open your phone, before you open your laptop, still do the normal stuff you do. Make coffee, chat with your loved one, take a shower, and then dive into it. And definitely get changed. Don't be in your pajamas all day. Make sure you still take your shower. And then the third biggest tip, I think, not really related to like what the work is, but I said it again, just over communication, right? If you're feeling disconnected from your team, trying to hop on calls, set up quick ways to chat with people. I think when in doubt, over communicate. Making sure that everyone who should know something knows it. Don't assume anything when you're remote, right? And I think that's where over communication is really important. Building rituals for that communication is really important. And then the next I would say is building processes around these remote work tools. Slack or Lattice or 15.5 is really important to get the organization's buy-in. So it's really
Right.
important everybody follows these practices. And it's definitely possible that the process is wrong or the technology is wrong, and it should be okay to throw those out the window, right? And what I advise for a new company moving work from home, don't sign yearly contracts with these tools or anything. You want to really try out what's best for your company, and different tools will be better for different companies. But it's really important that you as the employee and you as the manager are following the rituals like everybody else, right? So it's
Right.
finding the tools, technologies, and rituals that are right for you, and making sure you help support them and enforce them. But get changed, make space for your work from home. Be mindful of communication, over communicate, and help be a shepherd of using these tools.